On March 27, 2026, the United States military suffered its most devastating technological defeat of the 21st century. It didn't happen in a dogfight over the Zagros Mountains, and it didn't involve a stealth fighter being shot down. Instead, it happened on the ground in the supposedly impenetrable sanctuary of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. Iran launched a precision-guided asymmetric counter-air strike that did the unthinkable. It blinded the quarterback of the American sky. One E-3 Sentry AWACS, a Boeing 707 frame aircraft worth $350 million, was caught on the tarmac. A single Iranian Fateh 110 ballistic missile, reportedly guided by real-time Russian satellite data, plummeted through the terminal phase of its flight. It didn't hit the hangars, it didn't hit the fuel depots, it hit the exact coordinates of the E-3's rear fuselage. The resulting explosion severed the aircraft's tail and sent its iconic 30-foot rotating radar dome crashing to the desert floor. In that single moment, the U.S. Air Force lost its eyes over the Persian Gulf. For the first time since the Vietnam War, American fighter pilots are flying into a high-threat environment without a clear picture of what lies over the horizon. The Samson option is being discussed in Jerusalem, gold is at $4,500, and the U.S. Air Arm is officially flying blind. The significance of Prince Sultan Air Base, PSAB, cannot be overstated. Since the 1990s, PSAB has been the bedrock of U.S. power projection in the Middle East. It was built to be a fortress, protected by a multi-layered ring of fire, consisting of Patriot PSC-3, MSE interceptors, and THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Systems. For Iran to penetrate this specific sanctuary is a signal that the age of the sanctuary is over. Every U.S. asset in the region, from the massive Al Udeid in Qatar to the smaller outposts in Jordan, is now effectively frontline. The destruction of tail number 81, Nastur Dasenwer 5, wasn't just a lucky shot. It was a demonstration that the IRGC's aerospace force has mastered the art of time-sensitive targeting against the world's only superpower. To understand why the loss of one 50-year-old airplane is a catastrophic event, you have to understand the Airborne Warning and Control System, AWACS. Most people see the E-3 and see a radar plane. In reality, it is a flying command post. The E-3 Sentry carries a crew of nearly 30 battle managers. From 30,000 feet, its radar can see 120,000 square miles of battle space. It doesn't just find enemy planes, it coordinates the entire war. It identifies which tankers are available for refueling, which targets are a priority for F-35s, and, most importantly, it tracks low-flying cruise missiles and drones that ground-based radar simply cannot see because of the Earth's curvature. Without the AWACS, an F-15 pilot is like a world-class boxer fighting in a dark room. He is powerful, but he doesn't know where the punch is coming from until it hits him. The loss of this aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base, PSAB, has created a detection gap of over 300 miles. Iran has effectively pushed the U.S. early warning line back into the middle of the Saudi desert, leaving frontline units in the Gulf with less than 10 minutes of warning for incoming strikes. Technical depth. The E-3 utilizes the AN/APY-1-2 Westinghouse radar. This system is unique because it uses pulse Doppler technology to filter out ground clutter. In the mountainous terrain of Iran, this is the only way to spot a cruise missile hugging a valley floor or a drone hidden against the backdrop of the Zagros Peaks. Ground-based radars in Saudi Arabia or on Navy destroyers are limited by the radar horizon. If an Iranian drone flies at 100 feet, a ground radar won't see it until it is only 15 miles away. At that point, it's too late. The E-3 was the only thing standing between a surprise slaughter and a coordinated defense. By removing the E-3, Iran has turned the entire Gulf into a blind zone for cruise missile detection. This strike occurred on day 28 of Operation Epic Fury. The U.S. Department of War, led by Secretary Pete Hegseth, had initially predicted that Iranian missile capabilities would be degraded by 70% within the first 2 weeks. That prediction has proven to be a fatal miscalculation. Iran's strategy has evolved from saturation to surgical precision. By utilizing a swarm of 29 cheap Shahed drones as decoys, they forced the PSAB Patriot and THAAD batteries to lock on and fire. While the American interceptors were engaging $20,000 drones, 6 high-speed ballistic missiles were already in the air. This is the economic attrition of modern war. The U.S. spent nearly $20 million in interceptors to kill drones that cost less than a used car, only to let a $700 million asset get destroyed by a single $150,000 missile. This isn't just a military loss, it is a mathematical failure of the American defense model. Strategic analysis. Epic Fury was designed around the concept of rapid dominance. The idea was to hit Iran so hard and so fast that their command structures would crumble. But Iran has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this. They have moved their missile launch platforms into deep cities, underground tunnels carved into granite mountains. The U.S. intelligence community failed to realize that Iran was holding back its most accurate missiles, the Fateh and Zulfiqar classes, for high-value targets like the AWACS. They baited the U.S. into a false sense of security, allowing the Americans to believe the missile threat was under control, only to reveal that the shield was actually a sieve. How did a short-range Iranian missile hit a parked plane with such terrifying accuracy? Global intelligence agencies are now pointing to a data bridge between Moscow and Tehran. Satellite imagery, geolocated by CNN and analyzed by our team at Global Context, shows that the strike hit the E-3 within a 2-hour window of it being moved from a protected revetment to an open refueling apron. This level of timing requires real-time surveillance. It is now widely believed that Russian Earth observation satellites provided the IRGC with the exact parking spot coordinates just minutes before launch. This transforms the Iran-US war from a regional conflict into a high-tech proxy war. Russia is using Iran to test fire their satellite-guided targeting systems against American high-value assets, HVAs, and the results have been devastating. There's geopolitical intelligence. The data bridge isn't just about imagery, it's about electronic intelligence, ELINT. Reports suggest Russian Tu-214R intelligence planes flying over the Caspian Sea have been sniffing U.S. radar frequencies and feeding that data to Iranian jamming units. This coordination represents a new axis of resistance that is technologically peer-to-peer with NATO. Russia's motivation is clear. The more U.S. AWACS and high-tech assets are destroyed in the Middle East, the fewer are available to monitor the borders of Eastern Europe. Moscow is trading its satellite bandwidth for American strategic exhaustion. The U.S. Air Force fleet of E-3 Sentries is currently at a breaking point. Before the war, there were only 17 operational airframes left in the entire inventory. Maintenance rates were already hovering at a dismal 56%. You cannot simply build another one. The E-3 is built on the Boeing 707 airframe, which went out of production decades ago. While the E-7 Wedgetail is the designated successor, it is not yet fully integrated into the Middle East theater. Every E-3 lost is a permanent reduction in the United States' ability to manage a global battlefield. Experts like Heather Penny, a former F-16 pilot, describe the AWACS as the Chessmaster. If you lose the Chessmaster, the bishops and knights, the fighters and bombers, become disorganized. We are now seeing the ripple effect. U.S. tanker aircraft, KC-135s, are being forced to fly further back from the front lines because there is no AWACS to protect them, which in turn limits the loiter time of combat jets over Iran. The logistics nightmare. Each E-3 requires 30 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour of flight. With one airframe destroyed, the stress on the remaining 16 is exponential. Crews are being worked past their limits, and airframes are being flown with deferred maintenance issues. If the U.S. loses 2 more AWACS, the entire global warning mission collapses. They would have to choose between protecting the Pacific against China or protecting the Middle East against Iran. There is no middle ground. The E-3 is a 20th century relic that the 21st century U.S. military cannot live without, and Iran just proved they know how to kill it. This AWACS failure is directly linked to the Dimona breach we covered in our last briefing. Without the early warning provided by the sentry at Prince Sultan Air Base, the Israeli and American interceptor batteries in the south were forced to rely on ground-based sensors. Because ground radar is limited by the horizon, they didn't pick up the low-trajectory AMAD missiles until they were already descending. This detection lag is the primary reason why the 4th Iranian warhead found the gap and landed just 800 meters from the Dimona reactor. Iran knew the U.S. was blind in that sector, and they exploited that blindness to put a knife to the throat of the Israeli nuclear program. Tactical breakdown. In a normal scenario, the AWACS would have spotted the EMAD launch from 1,000 miles away. It would have provided a queued data link to the Arrow 3 batteries in Israel, giving them 4 extra minutes to calculate the intercept. In the blind scenario at PSAB, the Arrow 3 batteries had to wait for the missiles to appear on their own local radars. Those 4 lost minutes were the difference between a clean intercept and a 12-meter crater in the Negev sand. The AWACS loss didn't just hurt the U.S., it nearly caused a radiological catastrophe in Israel. The markets are reacting to the loss of the AWACS with pure panic. Gold's surge to $4,500 isn't just about the missile strike. It's about the realization that the U.S. high-tech shield is penetrable. Wall Street analysts are now pricing in a prolonged blind war. If the U.S. cannot protect its own command and control planes at a high-security base in Saudi Arabia, then no infrastructure in the region, oil refineries, desalination plants, or data centers, is safe. The nuclear premium on oil, currently at 150 cents per barrel, is a direct reflection of the fact that the U.S. has lost escalation dominance. Economic intel. The security insurance for the global economy has effectively been canceled. For decades, the petrodollar was backed by the implicit promise that the U.S. Air Force could protect the flow of energy. That promise is now being questioned. If an AWACS can be hit, a supertanker can be hit. If a supertanker can be hit, the Suez Canal becomes a liability. We are seeing a massive de-risking where capital is fleeing the Middle East and pouring into hard assets. Gold is no longer a luxury. It is the only safe haven in a world where the high-tech shield has been shattered by a 1970s-era ballistic missile design. There is a secret layer to this defeat that the Pentagon is refusing to discuss: the electronic warfare EEW blackout. When the AWACS was hit, it wasn't just the radar that went offline. The E3 acts as a high-altitude Link 16 relay, the encrypted Wi-Fi network that allows F-35s to talk to Navy ships. When the tail was severed at PSAB, the network in the southern Gulf didn't just stagger, it went silent. For 6 hours, U.S. pilots reported comms out scenarios where they could not receive target updates from Central Command. In the silence, Iranian electronic warfare units near Bandar Abbas began broadcasting spoofing signals. They mimicked U.S. air traffic control, attempting to lure coalition jets into Iranian-controlled kill zones. This level of EW sophistication suggests that Iran has successfully integrated Russian Krasuka-4 jamming technology. The blind quarterback is now dealing with a noisy stadium. The U.S. is not only struggling to see the enemy, they're struggling to hear their own commanders. The blinding of the AWACS has had a direct impact on the northern front. Hezbollah has long been deterred by the God's eye view of American surveillance. They knew that any movement of long-range rockets would be spotted by the AWACS patrolling the eastern Med. With the Sentry fleet now stretched thin and diverted to cover the gap in the Gulf, Hezbollah has begun a massive SINA infiltration movement. Intelligence leaks from Cyprus suggest that thousands of Hezbollah fighters have moved into the red zones bordering the Galilee, using the AWACS blind spots to relocate heavy artillery. The destruction of one plane in Saudi Arabia has effectively lowered the guard on Israel's northern border, proving that in modern geopolitics, a strike in the desert can trigger a war in the mountains. Finally, we must look at the impact on the NATO alliance. In Brussels, an emergency session of the North Atlantic Council was called last night. European nations, particularly Poland and the Baltics, are terrified. They rely on the U.S. AWACS fleet to monitor Russian troop movements. With the U.S. now forced to pull AWACS from the European front to replace the loss in the Middle East front, Europe is suddenly vulnerable. For the first time in NATO history, the U.S. has had to ask its allies to backfill strategic surveillance. But the UK and France only have a handful of these planes. The symmetry of defense is broken. Iran's single missile at PSAB has achieved what decades of Soviet diplomacy couldn't. It has forced the U.S. to choose between the safety of Europe and the survival of its Middle Eastern interests. The destruction of tail number 81 Armor 005 at Prince Sultan Air Base is a warning to every military commander on Earth. In 2026, air superiority is no longer a given. It is a fragile state that can be shattered by a few drones and a Russian satellite feed. The U.S. Air Force is currently scrambling to move its remaining AWACS to safer, more distant bases like Diego Garcia, but the damage is done. The eyes are gone. The Chessmaster is off the board. And as the smoke clears over the Negev and the Saudi desert, the world is beginning to realize that the most powerful military in history is currently fighting with one eye closed. Subscribe to Global Context. We don't just report the news, we explain the structural failures that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. Hit the notification bell. In a war of blind men, the one who can see the context is king. Stay sharp, stay informed.